Welcome to CIHT Podcasts.
So as part of a focus by CIHT on the future of transport, today we look at micromobility and how this could change the way we move in the future. As this is high on the government agenda with trials of e-scooters currently underway in the UK, I'm delighted to be joined by Philip Ellis, CEO of Beryl. I'm your host, Justin Ward. Beryl is the UK's largest bike share provider outside of London. And recently it was announced that they were going to run a trial of rental e-scooters in Norwich. So we'll hear more about that. So thanks for joining us as we look to explore the future of micromobility during and post-COVID-19. I think for some people, they might not know what micromobility means. So welcome, Philip. Could you just explain what we actually mean by micromobility?
Hi there. Yes, thanks for having me. Yes, fair question. Micromobility, depending on where you are in the world, basically means a kind of single occupancy vehicle up to a maximum of, some people say sort of 300 kilograms in weight, which would, some people say sort of 500 kilograms in weight, which would therefore, mean everything from a scooter all the way up through bikes, cargo bikes, etc., perhaps all the way up to some of this small electrically enabled, often single occupancy, maybe a couple of people, sort of hybrid electric bike, electric vehicles that exist as well. So yeah, I mean, in the UK, the main elements of it are bikes, electric bikes, and electric scooters, in their sort of most common use.
And what does the future of micromobility schemes look like as the world returns to some sense? It's difficult to say that right now, but some sense of normality after COVID.
Yeah, I think so. For us, we've always worked quite closely with operators and local authorities of micromobility systems. And for us, first, that was bike share systems. So sort of our upbringing, as it were, in this industry was as a supplier of technology and products to big, complicated bike share systems like London and New York, who have, tens of thousands of journeys a day, millions of journeys a month happening, with quite well controlled and regulated bike share systems. And yeah, we supplied products, and then there was a sort of boom in 2017, first of all, with Dockless bikes, largely out of Asia. And then it received another shot in the arm in sort of 2018 with Dockless electric scooters. And I guess our vision and our belief in what, riders want, what local authorities and transport authorities want, and also like how to implement these systems in a way that doesn't negatively impact every other road user and particularly pedestrians. We think that we want to be installing shared bike, e-bike, electric scooter systems that are built around specific pick-up and drop-off locations that, and as soon as you start going down that route away from like pure Dockless, the other natural thing that has to happen therefore is like quite close collaboration with local authorities in order to sort of get that real estate, in order to identify those areas where bikes can be picked up or dropped off. And so, yeah, we think therefore, the future of these sorts of services is a mixed fleet of vehicles, but not like wild proliferation of every new innovation that comes along that's got an electric, motor attached to it. And yeah, delivered in close partnership with local authorities. And I think we think that that's just how the future is going to go. We think it's absolutely how the future should go as well. So that's how we're set up to work.
Yeah, it was almost, you mentioned about the Dockless bikes. I remember a meeting with TfL a number of years ago, and they were looking at all the sort of various futures that were emerging. Some were positive and some were negative, and I think that they found that the Dockless bikes that were just ending up all around the streets and places seemed a bit uncontrolled, in the sense that they kind of were there suddenly. They were there one day. So there is a bit about parking there, isn't there? A bit about the zoned space. Is that quite a key thing for your business in terms of how you see the future of micromobility provision in cities?
Fundamentally, there's nothing wrong with the thing. The bike or the electric scooter being deployed in a sort of dockless way. If people are still able to get on it and use it, that's a positive thing. And the bikes themselves, you could, whatever level of quality they're at, or the scooters, whatever level of quality they're at, you obviously you have to deliver something that's safe and of a higher quality that people want to use. But it comes down then to, you have to operate these things with quite a degree, like with a high level of control. In order to, first of all, make sure they're safe, you need to know where they all are so that you can service them, so that you know exactly who and how they've been ridden, who and how they've been serviced. And that's quite a mature operation, both on street and in the workshop. And like that, as much as anything, I think is where the dockless stuff fell down, is they were just, it was the business model didn't support a proper mature operation of them. And the same is absolutely true of electric scooters as well. Like the business model is without a significant amount of operational control and operational servicing. So the dockless in and of itself, I don't think is necessarily the problem, but in order to deliver that level of operational control and reliability and safety, for us, like we would have no chance of sort of, you'd have to sweep every square inch of a city every day if they're completely free floating. Whereas the parking, obviously means the parking locations means you go to 200 specific locations, for example, or 500 specific locations every day. And that obviously means it's possible, basically, that you can build a team and monitor your vehicles in a way that does that. But then, yes, so that to me is a really, really important part of it. And there's loads of other stuff that goes off the back of that as well. Like, public transport systems need to be like predictable and reliable. And obviously, if you know that there's always somewhere where you can pick up or drop off your bike or electric scooter, you get that predictability and reliability. And if you're going to use the space, then you need to have really mature contractual relationships with the highways authority or the local authority or the landowner and things like that. And yeah, they all sort of feed into each other, but it's not just a case of, well, you need parking locations because because dockless didn't work, right? You need parking locations because they're better for those reasons that I've described. And it's not to say that some sort of there's not necessarily a form of vehicle, whether micromobility or otherwise, it can't be sort of distributed in a dockless way. Obviously, there's car share systems that are dockless or free floating, and maybe that method of deployment might be right for certain types of things. But certainly at our end of the shared transport spectrum, bikes, electric scooters, electric cargo bikes, a free floating dockless doesn't make sense.
Now, there's a huge amount of interest at the moment with and surrounding scooters. So before looking forward to hearing about the trial in Norwich, but before we do that, it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on what can be learned from European and USA in terms of what they've learned so far from the use of e-scooters, and then we can go on to what's happening on the ground here.
So I guess, first of all, from a sort of economic model perspective, clearly there are not that many cities in the world that can really handle multiple operators. There's only ever going to be a relatively small sliver of people in a city who are going to use a shared electric bike or shared electric scooter. Now, obviously, in our systems, if we've got bikes, electric scooters, electric cargo bikes, then, we're increasing the addressable market and increasing that sliver of people who are going to use our services. But as soon as if you layer on 2 or 3 other operators, you're really narrowing that sliver down to something that feels like it's uneconomical in terms of the number of people who are going to be riding these things. So I think one key learning is, you've really probably got to be a mega city, London, Paris type size of city, if you want to have multiple operators. I think in places like Madrid, at the initial sort of chaotic times of electric scooters, there's something like 15, 16 operators, which is just crazy. And then in terms of, what else have we learned? I think from a city perspective, there's been a couple of different approaches. So in Germany, they sort of regulated quite heavily on the vehicle itself. So, the vehicle had to be, that was great actually, because it raised the standard of vehicles that was available. It raised the standard of scooters, right? It raised the standard of scooters that was available to the market. So now we're the beneficiary of that, because we can work with suppliers and get scooters that are absolutely excellent, actually. They're really robust, big, safe 12-inch wheels, powerful motors, etc. So that really raised the bar in terms of the vehicles that we're now able to deploy. And registration and licensing, driving license checks, etc. So that sort of raised the bar around the vehicle and around the ride. And then I think another place like Paris, which is people say is the most significant single market for bike share, for electric scooter share in the world, which probably makes sense. Their bike share system on a peak, I think over the summer it got something like 172,000 rides in a day, which is absolutely incredible for a bike share system. But they have basically, they've sort of moved toward this parking bay based approach. So encouraging people to pick up and drop off in specific identified locations. So I think those are a couple of sort of things that have moved the market on in terms of the vehicle, the rider experience, and then how they're actually operated. Yeah, I think that's probably the main things that we've seen, and we're seeing some of that pan out in the UK now. So, for example, the West Midlands have appointed a single operator for their 1-year trial, and we'll see what happens in other parts of the UK.
And you've secured the trial of rental e-scooters in Norwich. What's going on there then? What's the story so far?
So in Norwich, we already have bikes, electric bikes, and electric scooters. So a little bit about our Norwich scheme. So we have, I think it's about 450 bikes, about 115 electric bikes, and then we're going to introduce initially 100 scooters. And this is quite important to us, because we think we actually really still quite like the bike, right? So most of the micromobility operators are sort of not trying to do normal bikes, and undoubtedly, the unit economics of bike share is more challenging than the unit economics of electric bikes or electric scooters, because you just cannot charge the end customer a particularly high price to ride a bike. Like, a lot of people are sort of associate riding a bike as free, and that's absolutely right. And we also want riding a bike to be as cheap as possible. Whereas electric bikes and electric scooters, people are willing to pay a bit more for. But we think active travel is really important, and actually we're able to deliver a lot of journeys on bikes, and then grow the pie, as it were, by introducing electric scooters and introduce new people into this sort of shared mobility behaviours. And so the point of having the vehicles is to offer more choice and increase the addressable market of people in that city who are going to use our services. And then we price it appropriately as well. So if you're going to ride a bike, it's extremely affordable. It's just 5p per minute. Whereas if you're going to ride an electric scooter, it's £1.50 to unlock, and then it's 10p per minute. So it's quite a bit more expensive. Same with the electric bikes, and that's because we really want to encourage people to be using the electric bikes for journeys that are closer to what you would otherwise be using a vehicle for, or getting in a taxi for, and things like that. And really, electric scooters are a price where we still want to see that electric scooters are not just like a toy. So we don't want them to be used 100% of the time for leisure. We genuinely implementing these at that price point within that mix of vehicles, because we know that there are people for whatever reason who are just not going to get on bikes, and there are people who might get on electric bikes, but there's definitely people who get on electric scooters. And so if they can start to do that, originally, the priority being to replace journeys that they would otherwise have made in a car or a taxi, then that is without a doubt, that's the main aim of what we're trying to do. And obviously now, the big shot in the arm that this has received in the UK is it's not just it's not just about getting people out of cars. Actually, it's about providing an option while the public transport capacity is lower than it was. in terms of number of people that can get on a bus because of social distancing. The other thing that's important to us about that scheme, again, that's all parking bay based. So all of these vehicles share the same parking bay. So you don't need to have a big docking station that, you can only dock one type of bike in, and then what do you do with your electric bike? What do you do with your scooters? We've got these parking locations and these docking locations that are all sort of agnostic to whatever it is you're parking in there. And also, for us, those parking bays are, we add greening and planting and seating and things like that, and hopefully adding, the sorts of things that we're starting to see come through in these sustainable active travel corridors, things like parklets and pocket parks and things like that, because all of our customers are pedestrians. All of our journeys start or end with a walk at the beginning, and pedestrians are really the top of the hierarchy in terms of road users, and so that's why the planters and the parklets that we've introduced hopefully not just don't impede pedestrians, they actually add a little bit more value to them, and places to sit and rest, or some greening that adds a bit of sort of placemaking to the roads where our bikes are.
And I think it is that modal shift. Like you said, the core objective was that it's displacing people from other journeys, particularly maybe car journeys or public transport use at the moment, given restrictions on that due to COVID. But the lessons from other cities or countries has not been so marked in that regard, in the sense that people who maybe ride e-scooters have shifted from walking or cycling. Is there evidence from, you mentioned Paris, I guess, or other cities or other countries, Denmark, where they have seen a shift in modes?
The jury is probably still out. So there's been cities in America, obviously very car centric, where you don't really have a public transport alternative, and the distances are so big that walking isn't necessarily an option, and cycling isn't in the culture, etc., etc. So there are places like that where there's been modal shift, according to user surveys of, I'm not exactly sure, but significantly less than 50%. So most journeys are still not replacing a car. And then you definitely go to places in Europe, and that number of journeys that are replaced from a car drops down again because of the better public transport and things like that. So definitely it's not that the majority of the journeys so far look to have been as though they would otherwise have been driven. But they're not, then it's a case of, well, the other challenge, I suppose, the other metric you have is over the course of 2019, I think most electric scooter journeys were about, apparently, according to sort of surveys from Germany, they're about 2.5 kilometers. So again, that's probably unlikely to have been that many car journeys. Now, over COVID, that has increased. So the journey length has increased. People are going much further on the electric scooters. And, we've got to wait to see the next round of sort of, qualitative analysis to see if also that percentage of journeys that would have otherwise been in a car, or probably actually the type of people who are using these services also might have been in an Uber or, a taxi or something like that. So I think it looks as though that percentage has certainly increased over the course of the last 6 months. But and it's as much as anything, there's always going to be a certain amount of journeys that are replaced from walking, but there's also a decent number of journeys that are replaced from cars, and also it's an asset that it's also a gateway, right? It's a gateway for us as well. So even if the other big element to a shared micromobility system, but a shared electric bike share system is it's like a massive behavior change project. If people see high quality bikes, companies such as ourselves investing in delivering these services, transport authorities, local authorities investing in delivering these services and turning over land use to cycling, then people see that mode of travel as a serious way of getting around. And then the shared system is a gateway. We have loads and loads of riders who use our services, use our bikes or whatever for a few journeys, and then decide to buy their own bike, or they're a lapsed cyclist, and the convenience of it means they start using it again, and then they start using their own bike again a lot more, and that pocket of people doesn't necessarily always come out in if you look at just the number of people that are using it. So I think there is a really big sort of behavioural change and a long-term cultural shift towards cycling and shared transport in general, and the systems that we implement at the thin end of the wedge on that.
One other thought, which I had just a question, was on on the safety aspects, and particularly the size of wheels. That's been something that feels like a sort of like a kind of small but kind of significant point in terms of the safety and what standards there are for the kind of routes where the e-scooters will operate in Norwich. Is that something that's you've had any discussions with the authority on?
In terms of the vehicle itself, I think the wheel size is quite important. So like the front wheel on our scooter is 12 inches and there's suspension forks. So that means, going over potholes or go up and down curbs and things like that, it can handle. And actually that is now a part of the UK government's sort of emerging criteria for electric scooters. Is they have this stability test where you have to demonstrate that your scooter, at load and at speed can go up and down curbs and things like that. So that is part of it. Obviously, in terms of, it's really easy for us to geofence controlled speed areas as well. So like if there's pedestrianised areas, capping the speed that the scooters can go at, because these things are, because they're robust, they're also heavy. They're, I think, 35 kilos. Add on a 80 kilo person, 120 kilos going at 15 miles an hour is significant. It could do a lot of damage. And so, it's really easy for us and for everyone else, really. Like the vehicles are so homogenized now that everybody can basically do the same thing with their vehicles. And if anyone innovates something on the vehicle, very few of the operators own their vehicle and own their design. If anyone innovates anything on it and it turns out to be a good idea, within a few months, everybody has it. So, you see, for example, Tier have brought out a helmet thing on their bike. Wind have got one as well, and like if that turns out to be a good idea, all the Chinese manufacturers will just put one on as well. And people are doing the same with indicators or mobile phone chargers or whatever else. So like it's really rapidly evolving, and something implement something that's an innovation to improve safety or improve user experience, and if it doesn't take off, then it'll just disappear, like sort of pop-up seats that people wanted to introduce on them a few months ago and things like that. But sorry, going back to the main point there, geofencing is a big part of our technology. Like that's how we enable the parking bays to be quite reliable. And so likewise, when the vehicle is in motion, if there's a specific street or specific area that you want to limit the speed on, then we can just do that in the back end and the scooter will power down when you're in that area. And
probably as a final thought is, how big might the electric scooter market be? And sort of aside to that is your aim of taking on sort of the giants of Silicon Valley in Asia. So how do you see your business growing in the sense of how big is the market, particularly looking at e-scooters in the future? But that's sort of, I guess, concluding area to look at.
Yeah, it's a good question. Obviously, this industry has been fueled recently by venture capital funding, which means, there's been any number of consultancies make projections around the size of the market, because that's the sort of narrative that gets built up in order to get these sorts of valuations and venture funding. But a big one that people often refer back to rather is there's a McKinsey study that says by 2030 the global micromobility market is between $300 and $500 billion. So like at top of the pile, that's the sort of size of the market. And I think that's excluding China, because China, that's obviously a massive swing factor. And then I guess in terms of how we approach the market, though, we're sort of, I guess, what I think we've learned from the Offos and the Mobikes and the Limes and the Birds and things like that, who really sort of boomed and then are sort of somewhat I don't know exactly how to describe how they're operating, but they're still going, most of them. is that like this sort of blanket, one product, one service, one approach, one deployment method, across any city, anywhere in the world, kind of doesn't really work. And, you have to sort of get the right balance of doing that. You have to be scalable, and it has to be possible to implement these things quickly and repeatably in order to make money out of it and to scale, because it does need scale as a business model. But we because of the partly because of how we operate, and but partly because of the nature of the relationships that we want to have with local authorities. Like, all of our contracts are 3, 5, up to 8 or 9 year contracts, and that means you have to spend a little bit longer understanding the strategies of cities that you're going into in order to make sure that you're establishing a service that can grow with the long-term strategies of the city. So it takes a bit longer to build that relationship with the city and then start to grow that service. So that's why we've launched in fewer cities. And so when we look at the addressable market that we're focusing on, it's more like sort of adding up a load of cities, across the UK first and foremost, but then now also looking at some North American cities and some European cities, and sort of building it up on a city by city basis. And I think there's a huge number of places when you start doing that. There's a big long tail of we've got a bike share system in Hereford, and that's a 60,000 person town or city, and that works very well for us from a profitability point of view. So there's a long tail of cities that we can work with, and also obviously the big cities where the economics are a bit better.
The economics of scale. Well, it's interesting, the economics of scale, given the focus not just in this country and high on the political agenda, but across the globe, about encouraging micromobility. So it's an interesting time for you to be at the heart of this, running a shared mobility providing platform. So it'd be interesting to hear how the trial goes in Norwich, and also all the best with sort of the next steps. So that was an interview with Philip Ellis, the CEO of Beryl.